Hello, everyone. I guess we can get started. Please note down the questions you might have during the session in the chat, and then I will make sure that I'm going to leave at least 5 minutes at the end to discuss those. So my name is Spyridon. I'm heading the DevSecOps Center of Excellence here at Danske Bank, and I'm here today to give you a taste on how we evolve our DevSecOps adoption in the firm from a 360 perspective. A little bit on the agenda, I'll tell you who we are at a glance and give you a little bit of a taste on what is the transformation that is currently undergoing in the firm. I'll take you through what was our historic DevSecOps state of the art in the firm, how we decided to move on by creating a 360-degree DevSecOps operating model, how we do this evolution in alignment across organization, a little bit of our approach towards compliance as code, how do we tackle multi-hybrid cloud, and then some of the opportunities that we have ahead of us, and how we think about them. As I mentioned, I will leave time for the questions at the end, so please paste them during the session. So getting started, we are a Nordic bank. We are headquartered in Copenhagen in Denmark. Currently, we're being segmented in two business areas. One is personal and business customers, and the second one, large corporates and institutions. We're organized following the Spotify model into 26 business tribes and 12 centers of excellence. One of it is the DevSecOps one, which I'm coming from. On our technological footprint, we have approximately 4,000 people employed in technology areas, from development to operations and from infrastructure to process engineering, for example, and we have approximately 22,000 employees in total. Our technological teams are located in the 4 Nordic countries, and we have nearshoring center in Lithuania and offshoring center in India. The Nordics are obviously our home markets, but we do have presence in 12 countries in total across the globe. Now, a little bit more than a year ago, we started a journey that we call A Better Bank by 2023, and this journey includes 3 main pillars. The one is to look into how we can digitalize our customer journeys. And this is customer to the bank, internal business unit to IT, and IT to IT. How we can uplift our enterprise agility capabilities, with the adoption of Spotify model being one of the many initiatives. And then how we can do a generous, brave, and forward-looking fit-for-purpose technology industrialization across our technological capabilities to make sure that we can run the bank the way we want in a digitalized era. Now, we do see DevOps as an enabler, actually, across these 3 pillars on get them into harmony and get them to move towards the right direction by engaging a broad ecosystem in our firm. Now, a little bit of a sneak peek. So basically, we have started adopting DevOps some years ago at the bank, and I'll give you a taste on how we used to look like more than a year ago and how it does still look like in certain cases as our evolution is in progress. So basically, we're coming from a setup that we had 5 unofficial DevOps operating models that were not really coexisting. So basically 5 different ways of doing DevOps in the firm. And N means here really God knows infinite number of CI/CD pipelines. So historically, any development team supporting a product were able to build their own pipeline and take it from there. A considerable number of hours of lead times when ordering infrastructure and technological utilities, quite some capability fragmentation and duplication. So basically, our technological ecosystem is not fully interoperable. Examples are our task management and test management tools with our CI/CD pipeline, and our CI/CD pipeline with our IT service management platform. And then quite some duplication of solutions, primarily in areas like observability, test automation, release management, and so on. On top of it, we had reconciliation gaps. So basically, the agile approach with the IT service management approach, the whole enterprise architecture, and DevOps, for instance, were not fully reconcilable, meaning that there was no continuity in the flow among them on an enterprise level. And also some gaps of understanding of concepts. And basically, we did catch ourselves in many cases to be speaking about the same thing, but to use different words and actually misunderstand each other and misunderstand what we can make out of concepts in essence. Then on the cultural side, actually, we're focusing on DDD, and DDD here is paraphrasing TDD and BDD, the test management methodologies. It stands for deploy, deploy, deploy. The most important thing in the organization was release velocity, to ship software and new products fast into production, while other quality aspects were a little bit downplayed. And then the overall culture in the organization also was fostering a trust me, I'm an engineer culture, without having a strong and rather light mechanism on trust but verify certain behaviors across the SDLC. But actually, if you're wondering whether this setup was working, well, it has been working. Actually, we kept maintaining our competitive advantage in our home markets. We have some award-winning platforms. We have a very high customer satisfaction. But definitely, what we came to realize is that this has been complex, costly, a lot of shadow IT, some technical debts, lack of harmony and alignment. And basically, we had to do something about it in the long run in order to be fit for purpose. So basically, how we managed to approach the situation, we came up with what we call our 360 degrees DevSecOps operating model, which we have tailor-made it, and we keep tailor-making to our ambitions and objectives. And basically, we started by defining what are the outcomes that we want to achieve. And the first one is compliance, which is priority zero for the bank. So we are faced with a lot of regulatory requirements from the Danish FSA and the British FCA, which are our main regulatory bodies, a lot of guidelines by the European Banking Authority, but also a lot of banking secrecy policies from our internal group non-financial risk and legal departments. Secondly, as I mentioned, we want to digitalize the customer journeys as much as possible. And this is from the person that would like to pay using mobile pay when purchasing something to a business user who would like to request a new feature to be developed, and to a developer that they would like to provision an ELK cluster in order to monitor their infrastructure and application. Then we do a lot of things around accelerating productivity. And this primarily goes into the heart of our DevOps ecosystem, which is our squads and the people that build and run software. But then it looks into the peripheral teams that are more supportive into building and running software. And then we wanted to get into an aligned autonomy. So find a very fine balance between making sure that our business tribes and the respective squads are autonomous on evolving their portfolio, but on the other hand, make sure that we do it in alignment. So basically, we get into the same picture altogether. Now, the model is primarily broken into 4 pillars. The first one is to define a vision and a way of working. So basically, what the vision, how we can tactically fit this into the broader vision of the bank, and some principles on how to run the bank. An example here is the field guides we have on reconciling enterprise agility, which is the adoption of the Spyridon model and the DevSecOps model at the same time. Then we do a lot on enabling the evolution, and actually we're using a model that we call ties as part of rolling it out. We do a lot of stuff on scaling and measuring where we are. We are coming up with a new CI/CD analytics framework, actually, that is collecting data through the pipelines and tells us how fast, but not only, we are. And then a lot of stuff around uplifting our skill set and changing the mentality. Our coding school, where our people have the opportunity to learn new technologies, is one example. Now, we are in a context of DevOps that is moving very fast, and we want to stay relevant. So we do a lot of environmental scanning in the form of working with service providers, vendors, attending conferences, doing our own research on new concepts to make sure that we stay on our foot and at the edge of the concept constantly. Now, the heart of this model is what we call capability engineering. And engineering here is the word that we use on purpose, because we would like to engineer as much as we can and as much as it makes sense at the same time, not to over-engineer things without reason. The first pillar into the other one is what we call our technological ecosystem. And basically, the ambition is to offer as much of our technology as it makes sense as a service and in interoperable manner. Our multi-hybrid cloud setup and our new standard CI/CD pipeline is one example. The stuff around quality engineering on how we can advance our QA capabilities and shift them left. Quite a lot of work on stabilizing our test environments. A quite radical, innovative, and slimming down in an engineer way of our software operations and process engineering capabilities. So basically, we are coming out with a new SDLC, which is the definition of engineered, in which one we embed some controls as well in order to make sure that we can capture adherence and compliance. And we're creating a series of frameworks with the observability one, looking into logging, monitoring, and capacity management, and not only being another example. Of course, a lot of stuff around compliance and security. Security is also becoming a very hot topic in the industry. So we would like to adopt them as code and sift them left. We have a new segregation of duties policy. The old one was not fit for purpose anymore for an advanced DevOps setup. And consecutively, we are re-engineering our identity and access management ecosystem in order to support us bringing the new model into life. Now, a lot of enablers, and we'll look into the totality of them. So we have started looking into patterns and frameworks, and we haven't, due to our historical state of the art, not really being used to it. So it is a new concept that we launch and get people to use predefined patterns and frameworks on getting what they want done around the model. Work around policies and primarily policy engineering. So getting to agree on what are the policies that we embed into the SDLC and basically get them automated so people follow them without really realizing. Stuff that we do around our people, and that is uplifting their skills, changing culture, do demarcation of personal ownership of different capabilities. And then inevitably a lot of stuff around our technology. And that ranges across our technological ecosystem without necessarily being only focused on CI/CD pipelines and cloud-native technologies. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to take you through the whole model, and it's much more detailed than what you see in the screen at the moment. But I'm going to focus on some certain areas, with one being our TIES model, basically how do we launch this evolution in alignment. I'll talk to you about the controls that we implement in the SDLC and how we approach that, and give you also a taste about our multi-hybrid cloud setup. Now, there was evolution in alignment. So basically, as I said, fine balance between autonomy and alignment. We want to make sure that we move together towards the same page. And we use a model that we call TIES, and this is an acronym for themes, initiatives, epics, and stories. The themes and initiatives are actually capabilities that we are enabling on an enterprise level. So basically capabilities that we collectively bring into life, and then they are available as a service to others to use. And others, primarily in this case, is the business tribes we have. And then our business tribes, in order to adapt these capabilities, are breaking down into epics and user stories, which is actually what they put in the backlog and they work on with quarterly targets. If we look into the themes that we currently have, and these are more than 40, it's quite extensive. There's a very fine balance between innovation, reliability, and compliance, with more focus on the compliance bit for obvious reasons. We are in the financial services industry, we're quite heavily regulated, as I also mentioned in the previous slide, and we want to make sure that we please our regulators while at the same time we balance innovation so we can push the boundaries in what we want to achieve. There are three main themes actually that are applicable to the DevSecOps evolution, and these are broken between regulatory and technological ones. The regulatory ones have priority zero, and basically are mandatory for everyone, while the technological ones are adopted at relevance. So basically each tribe, squad, and the respective products won't go through the same journey on the technological side. It depends a lot on the functional and non-functional requirements and vision, but they're all going to go through the same journey on the regulatory ones. I brought some examples here just to give you a feeling. So basically one of the things is what we call development speed and how we can speed up our development process. And our CI/CD pipeline completeness framework is one example. And basically that gives you the totality of capabilities you could enable on your CI/CD pipeline in order to get a complete picture together with the policies, processes, and everything that you need to make sure also that you are balancing release velocity with reliability and compliance. Then the second one is a cloud first. And basically this is our multi-hybrid cloud strategy. And one good example here is our continuous delivery agnostic framework. So basically we do have the ambition to be able to deploy cloud native applications in agnostic targets, looking both on premises and out there, and we have established a framework on this one. And then the last one that belongs to the regulatory track is our SDLC controls and mechanisms around keeping integrity of our source code repositories is a good example to mention. Now, these three themes are being reconciled and actually are part of our overall strategy on where we want to get into with our technological capabilities in the future. Now, compliance as code, and actually that we do primarily for two purposes. The first purpose is we have regulators, and they require evidence, and they have the requirements that we need to respect. And secondly, we want to internally make sure that people well behave, and also have a very light mechanism in order to trust but verify that certain principles are being followed. The four pillars that you see up in there is how we have broken down our new SDLC, and you can see continuous everywhere because it's using DevOps as a foundation and the setup of continuity. And then we're working on implementing automated. And automated here is important, very important as a word on our intentions, controls across the flow. So basically, from the very first moment that you commit one line of code, till the moment that this code has reached production, it's been successfully monitored and eventually even sunsetted. The core domains where we look at is service reliability. And here we borrow a lot of practices from Google. We are not calling it site reliability engineering because we want to make sure that we don't try to adopt something that maybe it's not necessarily needed for our context, but we use a lot of inspiration from Google, calling it service reliability. Stuff around quality assurance, and this can be from unit tests to production readiness reviews. A lot of stuff around identity and access management, going from permissions to who can access what. Security, inevitably, that can actually be our shift security left architectural principles and how to build security by design, but also stuff like our open source code repos, scanning policies, but also vulnerability of scanning of Docker images and the corresponding violation management mechanisms, and a lot of stuff around release engineering. And basically, release engineering is we're using the CI/CD as a backbone, and we break it down into several phases of release engineering that we do basically implement some controls to make sure of well behavior across it. Now, engineering and relevance is key, and with engineering means automated, and we have taken a brave decision that we need to do the most we can in order to automate these controls, because if we put the organization into manual efforts, then we violate the core principle of DevOps business continuity. And then relevance. And relevance is because not every application is identical, and not every application needs to go into the same depth of controlling in brackets. So we are using primarily two mechanisms. One is a security assessment of our portfolio, and second is criticality assessment of our portfolio. And then basically we bundle applications into categories with corresponding controls being applicable to them. Nevertheless, despite the level you fall in, there's some minimum viable, we call it adherence and not compliance, in order to give to it a more positive feeling that is applicable to everyone. So basically, when we engineer, when we detail relevance, we look into being very tactical on how we embed the controls into the SDLC. So basically, we're going through the front-to-back value chain of designing, building, deploying, running, decommissioning software, and we tactically place controls where we see that they do make sense and on the one hand are aligned to what our regulators are asking to do, but also controls that give us real insight of well behavior and compliance. And then we want to make it event driven, and we use actually this simple term internally that is build and deploy driven. So basically everything we do should be triggered either by builds or by deployment mechanisms, and then have the evidence being automatically generated. And then to the best possible extent, while being conscious that this is not possible in every single case, have the controls embodied into the technology. So basically have people, by consuming certain technologies, when, for instance, they provision a server as a code, when they get onboarded into the CI orchestration, that they consume the controls by default and they don't really need to do anything from their end. Now, very important is an automatic generation of evidence. And this is very important also from a regulatory perspective. If you cannot prove to your regulator that you're doing it, then it's like you don't do it. So very important aspects that actually it can become a very big negotiation within the organization, how to do it, taking into account that you need to balance release velocity, reliability, security, and compliance at the same time, which is a little bit of a sophisticated and scientific task to some extent, you can say. And then a very important capability that we want to enable in its totality is what we call our multi-hybrid cloud. And basically, this is broken into three main capabilities. The first one, which is our pride, is our Cloud 2 portal. This is a homemade portal that we have, which is actually using Terraform playbooks in order to provision different IT assets, from Linux to Windows machines and from RabbitMQs to a Kafka cluster. We keep building into this one, actually. We want to advance it and provide more capabilities and shift people towards an infrastructure as code mentality for many different reasons, including compliance also, because they got to get security baselines out of the box. They got to get versioning and the SIMTB out of the box. So basically, it's not only an innovative capability that makes things faster, but also makes sure that we can keep hygiene on it. Then we have a very good percentage of container adoption in our portfolio. We're doing very well, actually, on adopting microservices and containers. OpenShift is a strategic platform. We are running on OpenShift 4, and we have upgraded on that lately, and it looks very, very promising, actually, in improved version of 3. We still have containers on the VMs running on Docker open source, but we have taken the strategic decision through the themes work I mentioned to move this to OpenShift. Then when it comes into public cloud, we are in the phase of due diligence, setting the governance, piloting certain lighthouses, and basically our strategy is that when we talk about infrastructure as a service, we want to offload our data center. When we talk about platform as a service, we want to buy capabilities that are cheaper to just consume from a public cloud provider rather than building in our cloud too ourselves. And obviously, when we talk about software as a service, it's collaboration tools. Now, moving into the public cloud, our teams have mainly 2 options. One is to refactor their application to cloud native. And actually here we have created our own cloud native definition. We didn't want to buy something from a vendor, and we wanted to put the people that have knowledge in the organization together and to define what cloud nativeness means for us, and then create corresponding patterns and frameworks so people can transform their applications. So one of the things we're looking at is an application that is built in microservices, and also that it uses domain-driven design to decouple from the legacy, primarily on the data part. Secondly, to use infrastructure as code practices in order to provision infrastructure. Definitely build your application about containers. We're adopting for the cloud native applications a GitOps approach. So basically, when you consume our standard CI/CD pipeline as a service, you get some very nice YAML templates that actually have engineered GitOps approach that we want people to follow and adhere to, getting away from using GUIs, to put it that way, on the CI/CD and more get into the command line. Then we're adopting other cloud native technologies like Ganesha Console here for service discovery. That primarily goes when we do have big scale and we really have real-time stuff happening like our mobile banking and markets front office. And then becoming a little bit more tactical and organized around secrets management. And here HashiCorp Vault is a solution that we are assessing. Now, very important in order to be defined as cloud native is that you can prove that you can handle reliability proactively. So basically, maybe you use some chaos engineering practices, maybe you're using some other site reliability engineering patterns, but you got to make sure that you fulfill your quality requirements very proactively. And then basically that you have met the cloud controls that are being defined. So everything you do out there is compliant, and it can be proven in an evident way. Now, the second option that our people have is the lift and shift, and this is in cases that the application is already cloud native. It is in cases that the cloud nativeness transformation, because it's not in all cases straightforward and cheap, it's more expensive than the actual lift and shift. And they're basically cases that we need to move something very fast and we don't have time for academic cloud native exercises. Now, in either cases, and something that we're looking at is very important that you amend your operating model and that you advance your skills. So basically, we surround this setup that you see with a multi-hybrid cloud operating model that basically looks into things like how do we hook up our CI/CD pipelines, how do we do cloud native assessments, how do we plug in IT service management, governance, billing, you name it. So basically, you need to adapt into this ecosystem. And then basically uplift the skill set of your people And I can tell you that when it comes into cloud operations, we want to enable site reliability engineering in all applications that they're going to run into the public cloud. And that requires a skill set advancement, but also organizing principle adjustment of the topology of the squads. Now, in either of the two cases, we conduct cloud native assessments. This is basically a checklist that we have created that has different questions that from an enterprise architecture and tribe architecture perspective, setup is assessed to define how cloud native or not it is. And then also there is an eligibility and trade-off analysis, because we want to avoid the pitfall that we want to move things to the public cloud just because it's fun. We want to make sure that there's a real return of the investment of doing the work. And basically there must be some approval to happen across different units that yes, this setup does indeed make sense to run outside of premises. So that was a little bit on the multi-hybrid cloud, but it's pretty exciting journey actually, this one, and one of the hottest topics in our new model. And then we have a lot of opportunities ahead. It's not sun is shining all over the place. We don't live in paradise. It's a big evolution. We do quite many things at the same time, and a lot of sweet headaches that we have to resolve as we move on. One is the culture. And actually, this is you can say the most challenging one, because culture is intangible. It's not something that you can press a button and can change. But what we want to achieve primarily on that end is to shift everything left, including the mentality. So starting thinking early about operational aspects of doing things, about non-functional requirements, quality requirements, think about end objectives. And we want to make sure that people think across the SDLC, despite where they're being placed in the organization. Then we have defined this objective of 25 minutes from commit to production. And basically, we want to get into an equilibrium of speed, reliability, compliance. So 25 minutes, and that is max. If you can do it in 2, happy days. We need to find a very fine balance on what does this 25 minutes include. So basically, which are the stages of the CI/CD, which are the controls that need to be passed, automatic approvals, you name it. So basically, we need to define a little bit the value stream within it and be more precise. Then quite some legacy. We have legacy platforms, legacy process, legacy policies. I mentioned the SOD policy that we did rewrite as an example. So we need to simplify, divest what is not needed anymore for the future, and basically do a little bit of re-engineering and things that are already there, but they need to become a better fit for purpose, like our identity and access management mechanism. Then we need to be very mindful on trust, but verify. We talked about autonomy, and we want people to keep that autonomy, but somehow we got to make sure that they play ball nicely. So basically, as part of the controls work that I mentioned, we define a light but automated governance in order to get the checks and the green lights that everything is fine, you are compliant, you can go ahead and be autonomous. Potentially looking into a license to operate setup, it's something that we would like to consider and something that we would like to discuss with our regulator as well. And then we have imperfect data. So if you can recall the 360 operating model, it is technically 30 plus domains, and you can guess what happens data-wise in all these 30 plus domains. So now we are taking the discussion on what makes sense to log. How do we aggregate data so we can look into the front to back of the value stream? Speed by itself doesn't tell us anything. We want to look into other parameters as well that define a complete and matured evolved DevOps setup. And basically, how do we read this data? So this is actually the most, I can call it scientific part of what we need to do, because it does indeed include some mathematics. And I can give you an example of a mathematical formula that we look at the moment is how do we calculate availability of services? So basically, especially when we talk about the cloud native part, what are the parameters in the mathematical formula that basically tell us how available an application is or not, getting away from just looking if a VM is up and running. Last but not least, very important is an opportunity to make this evolution organically desirable. So get the organization to really have desire about the vast majority of things that happen, and actually get it to happen organically, because what we want to avoid is people on the one hand adhering because someone told them and they haven't felt like, but also would like people to push the boundaries, innovate, come with new ideas, and actually feed this back to the model so we can advance it. And this is actually what I had. I would like to thank you for attending. A big thank you to all my colleagues at Danske for making things happen daily. And let me exit the full screen so I can go to your questions. I don't see any actually. Let me wait for some time. Thanks, Adam. So basically, the biggest win, Adam, is that we got into a coalition. And I know this sounds very romantic, but it is the truth. So basically, looking into the 360 DevOps operating model, we really came into coalition across the organization on how to move on. I can give you some numbers to show you how big that is. We're involving 15 different areas in the organization on bringing this model into life. And this is on top of the 26 business tribes that we have. So basically, the fact that we go to a coalition and agreed what we want to achieve with this in the coming years, I think that's the biggest win because this is the most decisive thing. Once you all agree where you want to be, there is better chance that people will contribute and also that they're going to become advocates on what happens in the rest of the organization. Of course, there are smaller wins here and there. There are reasons to celebrate on a daily basis, but I believe that that's the biggest one. Any other question from anyone? You can ask me actually things that maybe were not on the slides overall on DevOps if you wish. So basically, Semantas, the real life use cases primarily is on SSI and SSH keys. And primarily, how do we integrate that into our build and deploy? So basically, we're hooking it up into retrieving secrets both to build and deploy applications. And that goes on the application layer, but also goes into our core infrastructure. So for instance, I can tell you that the tool we're using for configuration management, without naming it, is also hooked up into the vault. So basically, if you want to do a massive patching on machines, then you have to get your secrets provisioned on a one-time basis. So these are currently the use cases. And then there's a bigger use case because I don't want to be misspecific. It's not my role today to advertise HashiCorp, but we also do see a very good ecosystem between the HashiCorp products. So combining Terraform, Consul, and Vault, it's something that is coming pretty straight away out of the box and does the magic, to put it that way. If you did again, where would you start to get value early? Actually, Adam, I would start from the same because we've done a lot of background thinking on where to get started from. And basically, we agreed that building a coalition is the most important thing. And then to align a little bit more on what building a coalition really meant and when I would start again early, we did do a very good job when we started adopting the Spotify model in order to align on the DevOps organizer principles. So basically, when we started breaking down the organization into business domains and creating new tribes and squads, we already at the same time agree what DevOps will mean on these squads from a topology perspective, responsibility perspective, skill set perspective, and how that maps into the DevSecOps operating model. So basically, getting people to align not only mentally that this is coming, this is happening, but also make sure that once they do the enterprise agility shift, that they already have a foundation that you can build on top. And it didn't come for free. Countless late night meetings actually on how this should happen by involving a big range of stakeholders. I know we have a little bit of latency, actually, so some questions might come in a little while. Of the topic is quite common to. So basically, Takumi, I think there is I've been quite some years in the DevOps industry myself, and the first real attempts I've seen, at least in the financial services industry, where I'm coming from, started in 2016. The whole containerization thing came end 15, beginning 16, and then I think it became a little bit more of got momentum at the mid of 2016 when Google published the SRB publication. So basically, what I have seen in my end, and that of course goes into the Nordic financial services industry, where I do have insights. There is quite of a good momentum on using containers. Now, is that Docker open source? Is it Kubernetes? Is it OpenShift? Doesn't matter. So I see more and more applications that are being containerized. Actually, I can tell you that both in this bank that I work at the moment at Danske and in another bank that I work with, it became mandatory that every new application had to be built around containers. Otherwise, they were not getting approval on their architecture document. So it has really picked up, actually, at least in the Nordics and in the FSI industry. Now, what's the interesting thing coming, actually, to provide a little bit more insights is how do you balance this brand new cloud-native containerized setup with anything that is not containerized, but it's still running on Windows and Linux, but even more tricky, how do you bundle it with your whole mainframe setup? Because big organizations need to balance a hybrid portfolio. And I have a personal experience that I was running a portfolio that actually had both cloud native, mid-range, we used to call them, or decoupled and mainframe applications. And while they were built in with different architectural patterns, they had dependencies on the data. So even if an application is being containerized, if it doesn't get out of the dependencies on the data part on the legacy, it can become a little bit of an issue. Any more questions from anyone? And again, you can ask general things like Takumi did. Right, I'm gonna keep waiting for 1 more minute if anything happens, if something comes. Yeah, that's a very good one, actually, Vitali. So basically, the most difficult thing when implementing security in the legacy bit, the way that I have seen it is dependencies on the vendor side. So basically, when it comes into primarily the vast legacy part, at least in the FSI industry, I'm used to, it's very much dependent on vendors. And basically, you need to do the whole security assessment together with them. And certain parts on this security assessment needs to happen from their behalf, and you don't really have insights. Is what as an ex-CIO I used to have is we need to trust them because they're a big vendor. So basically, it is a little bit of a problem. And then certain tools like Fortify, like Black Tag, just without advertising them, naming some, they cannot be used into the legacy part. Also, if we look into modern application security practices, some of them are really made for modern applications. And when you have a monolith that is on a DB2 database and basically is using IBM MQ to transfer data and so on, you're a little bit limited on how creative you can be with that. Now, on the other hand, you can say that the risk is less on this technology security-wise from the way they've been built. But wrapping it up, I think it's a vendor dependency, and also it is technological capabilities that will enable you to be very creative. Also, and yeah, how come did I forget that? I don't know what I'm going to say. I hope I won't be misperceived now, but security hasn't been a hot topic back in the days. So basically, if you want to find people with skill set on, let's say, mainframe security, you're going to struggle a little bit in the market. You get better chances to find people that they can look into security in a cloud native landscape. Takumi, this is a great question. So basically, this is I call it a DevOps ecosystem question. So you gotta definitely get started with adopting DevOps internally, right? So you need to align internally the way that you do it. Now, when you do have third-party dependencies, is that a vendor that you use an application from to do trading, for instance, or to get prices from the stock exchange? Is it a vendor that you use as part of your core infrastructure? Doesn't matter. You need to bring them into the DevOps ecosystem, and this is primarily when they do deliver software packages to you, as an example. So definitely you gotta start this adoption internally, but then you need to become a little bit firm to your vendors what you expect from them in order to make sure that they fit your DevOps ecosystem. And actually, this is very important because normally when we look outside, when someone is not in the room of the core people, then we don't think about them. But there comes the time that they come into play. And I can tell you this thing from a regulatory perspective and what the EBA, the European Banking Authority, is asking. They're asking us to ask vendors for evidence around quality assurance, around security controls, and so on, together with the releases. So before they deliver software to us, they need to provide evidence that they don't have holes on any open source license they're using. They've done quality tests, they've done regression tests. No, these are those capabilities, actually. We still have a minute. Megumi, out of curiosity, why do you think that maybe in your country the container adoption has gone a little bit slower? Is there any particular reason you think, or is it just that things are normally taking time? We're talking about new concepts. 10 seconds to go. Right. Yeah. I fully get it. Actually, it's becoming a challenge in Europe as well. It's not an easy market at all. It's very competitive, and there is shortage all over the place. That can be worked out in with creative ways, but yeah, it can become an issue involving actually not having enough and skillful hands. Very well, we are out of time. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for your questions. And if you want to discuss further, and if you want to get in contact, you can find me on LinkedIn. Have a good afternoon or morning or night, depends on when you're located. Bye-bye.